Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Man City podcast. On this episode, I caught up with Brian Horton, City manager from 1993 to 1995. This is probably the most excited I've been for a podcast interview. Brian was the manager in the season I got my first ever season ticket at Main Road, and I loved watching his team play. Beagrie, Walsh, Rosler, Quinn, they really were great times.
Oh, look at that from Beagrie, that's real wing play, vintage stuff. Quinn, Walsh is in the centre waiting. Walsh!
The few years after Brian was sacked were terrible, and the memory of his side kept me believing that we could watch decent football at Main Road again at some stage. So I got his thoughts on his time in charge. What was Peter Swales like? How did he deal with the civil war he found when he arrived? And how badly was his sacking handled? Brian Horton, 2,000 games in football as a player, manager or assistant manager. When you entered the game as a young person, could you ever have imagined that you would be involved in so many games?
No. There's only ever three ever done it, so Alex Ferguson, Graham Turner and myself. So from being an apprentice at Walsall 15 to 17, getting a free transfer, so that you think the whole world's collapsed, playing part-time football, working on the building. So no, I never ever dreamt that would come back and go to that many games. But fortunately, Gordon Lee took me to Port Vale from Ensford, and then obviously carried on playing a lot of games, and then managing, and then being number two, like a director of football role. So just every different role in football. So it's been great.
Some players aren't predisposed really to be a manager. When did you realise in your playing days that you were the kind of person who could be a coach and a manager? Was there somebody in the game who tapped you on the shoulder and said you've got what it takes, or did you realise yourself?
No, I did it myself because I was captain everywhere I went. So that was sort of the beginning of it, I suppose. And then I started doing my coaching badges when I was at Brighton when I was about 27, because that's where I was leading up to, 27 to 31, 32 in those days was looking, being an old player basically. So that's when I started thinking about taking my badges and going into some kind of coaching or managing.
You've just brought out a book which chronicles your time in football. How did that come about? And was that a project reflecting on your career in that way? Was it a project that kind of increased how proud you are almost and made you realise all your achievements in the game?
Yeah, I think reaching 1,000 games as a manager was probably one of the best parts of my managerial career, obviously, because there's only about 28 ever done it. So going from playing 700 games to managing over 1,000, and then you start thinking about other things. And people have said to me about doing a book, and it was only when Tim Rich, who I think has done a fantastic job with the book, he came to do a book on Man City managers, and obviously my chapter he did, and he just said to me, wow, you got some great stories, and he looked into it, and then he decided the title, over 2,000 games, which I didn't realise it was over 2,000, and it came about like that, and I think he's done a fantastic job of the book.
Yeah. The foreword by David Pleat, he was obviously a very distinguished person in football. He says, I was honoured and proud to be asked to pen a foreword for this diamond of a man. He was and is without doubt the most influential person I've had the pleasure to be associated with in the game. When somebody like David Pleat writes something like that, I mean, how proud does that make you and your family?
Well, I was lucky to have Gordon Lee as a manager, who did great. He went on to manage Newcastle and Blackburn. Then I had Alan Mulder at Brighton. Peter Taylor signed me initially, but I only played 12 games. So Alan had me for 5 years as a captain, promotion. So I learned a lot off Alan. And then going to Luton, to David Pleat, learned different types of coaching and management. And we asked him if we'd do the foreword. Tim and I drove down to Luton to meet him. And he said to Tim, I don't want to just do it to you. I want to actually write it myself, And I think it's fantastic forward. I speak to David every week, and all he talks about is football. It's not, have you had a round of golf, or have you been to the race, or whatever. Just football. And I'm much the same, to be perfectly truthful, but I think it's a fantastic start to the book.
obviously the bit that we want to focus on is your time at Manchester City, which is managerially probably the high point for you. You were manager of Oxford at the time. Peter Swales presumably approached you to take the job. How did that feel? So to be manager of Oxford and for a club like City to come in and to show interest in you?
Oh, it's fantastic. It was a move that, could never turn down. It was John Maddox who actually rang me to say Peter Reid had been sacked. Would I be interested? Could I speak to the Oxford board and get permission to speak to you? So I met John and Freddie Pye in a hotel in Stafford, Tillington Hall, for the initial, talk about coming to Man City. And then obviously the next step was Peter Swales, which I did, and then announced on the Friday night when they played Coventry at home at Main Road.
Peter Reid had been in charge. There'd been quite a few fifth place finishes, and City were kind of looking like they were possibly on the cusp of doing something decent under Peter, but then things did start to go wrong. What did you find when you took over? What was your assessment of the squad, the age, the appetite, that kind of thing? What did you make of it?
Well, I had to react very quickly because I was appointed on the Friday, and then we're playing Swindon following Tuesday night. I think it was Tuesday, and so a little time to breathe. Really, we went down to watch a game because we didn't play on the Saturday. Mossy and I drove down to Norwich to watch Swindon play. I didn't need to watch Swindon play because I've been at Oxford for 5 years, so I knew them like the back of my hand. So that was a good start for me to go there. So little time to have a massive input into it, but won my first game, won my second game 3-0 at home to QPR, and all of a sudden we got on a little bit of a roll again. And I inherited a good side. Peter had done a great job with them, but that's football because you've had a little bad spell that things happen. So. Initially, I just got those players to work with, but great set of lads, and then obviously introduced some of my own players as we went along.
United were just starting to have success. Ferguson was around this time. The dynasty was beginning to happen. As a Manchester City manager of that time, were you aware of that, and did it kind of increase the pressure a little bit on whoever was in charge of City around that period? Because United was starting to look like a side who could habitually win trophies. Yeah,
they were the team, weren't they? And unfortunately, my first derby game, we 2-0 up at half time, and we got beat last kick of the game. So that was a real kick in the teeth, that game, because had we won that, and a 2-2, Schmeichel made a great save from David White for us to go 3-2, and they broke and scored the last minute goal. So that changed it, and then the 5-0 defeat at Old Trafford was a huge blow. But they were the best side in the country at that time, and that's who we're chasing. And but that's football. You got to chase, and that's why I was introducing, Peter Beagrie, Uwe, Walshy, and I was trying to get some defenders in as well to make us better. Not just because it was defensive players we needed. I just needed a stronger squad, and obviously refused. So that's when it was getting a little bit like, I wasn't going to be the man that was going to be there the following season.
So that first season you came in, you took over from Peter, and obviously you saved us basically from relegation in the end. Things weren't looking great, but then we brought in Peter Beagrie, Paul Walsh, Uwe Rosler. How important were those three? Let's talk about them individually, actually, because I think they were three great players for City. I mean, Uwe was a bit of an unknown, wasn't he? Tell us about how that deal came about.
I just got a phone call from an agent, and he said, what are you looking for? And Niall was injured, he'd done his cruciate. And I said, I'm looking for a striker. He said, I've got an East German striker who's had an operation on his ankle, and he's looking for a club, and he's available to come and train with you and play in a reserve game. So we had a reserve game on the Tuesday night. He trained with us a couple of days, great attitude. We played in the reserve game. Francis was there, and we got him off at half time, signed a short-term contract, and he played in the first team on the Saturday at QPR. So that was a very, very quick one, and obviously he went on to be a fantastic player for Man City and a fan's favourite,
Yeah, he's a real hero. So that trial game, or the reserve game where he played, he took him off at half time. The reason for that is because you were concerned that he was going to get spotted by others? Because presumably lots of scouts turn up to those types of games.
Well, that's how I'd seen Steve Lomas. I mean, Steve Lomas was introduced to the side, and my first Monday morning in the football club, I got a phone call from Preston saying that they'd done a deal to 100 grand plus Steve Lomas for a player from Preston, and I said I'd seen Steve play in the reserves many times, and I went, what? We're giving you 100 grand plus Lomas for one of your players? No chance. So I pulled that plug on that one, and then obviously he broke into the side, and him and Flitty were fantastic together. What a good player, Gary Flitcroft. You know, it doesn't always get a mention, but we gave him a 5-year contract because he was playing for the under-21s, England under-21s. So they were pivotal to how I wanted to play, because it was almost like 4-2-4. I'd brought Nicky Summerby in, Uwe in, Walsh in, Beagrie in, and all of a sudden Nicky was a good player, underrated in my opinion again, because Nicky would always work hard coming. Beagrie was an absolute out-and-out winger, and I tried to get Anders Limpar, and we actually met at the Stanleylands by where Francis used to live, and we thought we'd done the deal with Limpar, and the same afternoon he got a phone call from Joe Royal, and Joe pipped us to him, and then I went racking brains. I said, well, you bought Limpar, what about Beagrie? And he went, yeah, we'll sell Beagrie now. So I rang Francis and said we could get Beagrie in. We had about 3 hours to do it. He had to come over from Liverpool to Main Road and talk terms, and we just about did it just before the deadline.
I think we got the better player there, didn't we? Better than Limpar?
He was outstanding on his day, Beagrie. What I liked about the players, we just mentioned 3 or 4 there. Flitty had he was competitive. Loam was competitive. You know, they had that in them. Walshy was competitive. Beagrie was competitive. Uwe, the German mentality where he worked his socks off. Quinny worked his socks off. Nicky was like almost a defensive, because he played wing back at Swindon, so I knew Nicky would always have a defensive brain, where Beagrie, no chance. Beagrie was just an out-and-out winger that wanted to play and go forward.
So yeah, and Paul Walsh was the third one, who I've spoken to Paul about this, and he always says that he's very proud of that period of his career, because he felt as an older player, because I think he was in his 30s when he came to City, he felt like there was doubters. People were doubting whether he was good enough, and he turned the City fans around completely, because he was fantastic for us for the whole time that he was there under your guidance. I mean, what kind of impact do you feel that he had on the team?
Well, I played with him when he was a kid at Luton, and he was young, and he always wants to entertain Walshy. He'd want to be 5 or 6 players, where sometimes you have to lay it off. 1 touch, 2 touch, lay it off, and he just got better and better at that. So when I bought him, eventually he'd been to Tottenham, he'd been to Liverpool, and he'd learnt those things, and he was a much more complete player when I bought him. But again, what I was buying, and it's not always about the player just on match days. It's people that are good round the dressing room, good off the pitch, good mixes, good team spirit. And apparently, I mean, I don't care what they do on the spare time, but they used to mix and go to the pub together, go for meals together, and that generates a good atmosphere within the football club.
Yeah. When you came to City then in that first season, you'd taken over from Peter Reid, the club was in a state of civil war, wasn't it, really, with the Francis Lee takeover looming. Peter Swales' reputation with the fans was at a low ebb. How did you deal with all that as a manager? Can you block that stuff out, or does that impact on things?
No, I had to block it out for my own sanity as well as the players, because it's got nothing to do with you. Eventually, what will be, and obviously what will be with me was finally getting the sack after that last game at home. So you have to block it out. You can't. You never sleep at night, and I always had the ability to do that, and I just set out to enjoy my time at Man City, and I think that's the response I got from them, because there's so many games that they bring up when I do the supporters clubs. They always bring the same games up. Of course, they bring the ones up where we got beat as well, but initially the 4-0 Everton and West Ham win, the Tottenham game, which John Motson said was one of the best he ever commentated on. Blackburn away, and we beat Blackburn, and our fans probably didn't want us to do it because we were almost handing Man United's title. So it was one of them where, do we want us to win? But I watched that game back. It's pouring down with rain. We were magnificent that night. Yeah. And there's games like that which gave me great pride, really, you know, and that's the big thing about when I go to these places, that people recognise the footballer I was trying to bring.
How did you find Peter Swales then? Because his sort of stock with the fans had fallen, but you say in the book that you found him an ideal chairman, really, because he was a chairman who would leave a manager to manage the team, which obviously, from your perspective, is exactly what you want, isn't it?
He did. I'd been fortunate in my career, really, because going to Hull when I was 34 as player manager, Don Robinson, who was a self-made multi-millionaire, he never interfered in anything in football. He said, I don't know anything about football. And that's why he made me a director of the football club. He said, I wanted to run the football club. He lived in Scarborough. I don't want to be coming down every day of the week to run it. You run it. So that's what he made me. So there was the first one. I don't think there's been one since. And then, ironically, I had to resign as being a director before he could sack me when I eventually went. And it was a shame because I had 5 years and good years with him. So then I got to Oxford after I went with Mark initially, Mark Lawrenson, and then Mark resigned, well, threatened to, and they paid him off. And then 5 years with Maxwell's, and Kevin was the same. Kevin Maxwell, not one bit. I mean, that's what we pay you for. You do the deals, you choose the players. You know the boundaries. I knew the boundaries where I could go financially. And when I came to City, Peter Swales, that was the exact words he said to me. Do you do all the transactions? And I said, well, I've done them for 10 years now. And he said, great, I want my manager to be doing that, you know. So that's what I did, and I got on great with him. You know, Freddie Pye was on the board, who was good. John Maddox was chief executive. And people made out that I was John Maddox's friend for coming up. I knew John was a journalist, and I believe he helped Mark Lawrenson get the job at Oxford, and probably helped me get the job when Mark went. But he became a friend, but he wasn't a friend that you know, like my best friend, I'll get you into Man City. It wasn't like that. It was a football decision. So I was just left alone, and that's for me how it should be. It's changed dramatically now in football, because you have director of football, you have, you know, people that are doing the transfer deals and everything. So it's totally different and bigger now. Obviously, with the introduction of Sky, which came when I was at Man City, it's miles bigger.
Do you think you could work under a director of football system? Do you think people, you know, sort of your Sir Alex Ferguson, that type of manager, back in the day, it was you controlled most aspects, whereas now they're pretty much a coach, aren't they, really? Yeah. They just coach the team and prepare the team. Could you work in that way?
That's the right word now. The coaches, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know, okay, they still have an input. I'm sure Pep has an input into the players that come into Man City, but they're helped by those people, and I think it takes the weight off them. So, you know, if Pep says, I want so-and-so from Barcelona, i.e. say Messi, then it's taken out of his ends, and it's up to the financial people to sort the deals out. Yeah.
So what was the difference then with, because you say Peter Swales left you alone, allowed you to manage. Francis, the impression I get is that he was more involved, particularly being an ex-player, which obviously not all chairmen are. A lot of them are just a businessman. The fact that he played the game, did that create a different dynamic between you and him as when he was chairman?
Initially, no. You know, we got on well. In fact, my kids went to the same school as his kids, so we were quite good friends in it. My son played the same cricket team as his older son, and we were okay initially. I think he just got frustrated to see that some of them probably weren't up to the standard as him, and I said that to him. You know, you were a top player. Some of these will never be as good as you. And I think he found it hard in that respect. You know, he got involved. Not so much picking the team all the time. He wanted to say, I understand that sometimes as well, but at the end of the day, the manager has to be the one to make those decisions, because at the end of the day, it's his head that's on the chopping block if things go wrong.
Yeah. Your second season then, because we stayed up, obviously, you kept us in the Premier League, and then your second season, which was your full season at City, we started unbelievable. I mean, you mentioned some of those games before. The one that really stands out is the Tottenham 5-2, which is, I think, for a lot of people, the best game they saw at Main Road. And as you said, John Motson, probably one of the best games he's commentated on. He's commentated on thousands. I mean, that was a really good Tottenham team, and it was two attacking teams. I mean, that must have been amazing to be part of that.
Well, I was staying in Mottram Hall at the time because Peter Swales had said to me about not moving my family from Woodstock to Manchester because of the takeover and whatever. So I was actually staying in Mottram Hall, and they were staying in Mottram Hall on the Friday night. So I had a drink with Ozzy and Steve Ferryman, who was his number two, and Dimitrescu, Petrescu, Sheringham, Barnby. I mean, their side was full of top class players. So,
Jurgen Klinsmann.
So we're expecting a hard game, and we're expecting an open game because what they were. But we were magnificent that day. I watched it over and over again when I've got it serial linked. If I wanted myself cheering up, I put that on. But people mention that all the time. It's the one game I think that people do genuinely believe was one of my best games whilst I was at City.
I mean, Paul Walsh that day, he had a point to prove, didn't he, to his former side, because he was absolutely inspired.
He wanted to prove a point to Tottenham, but that's Walshy. That's what he's like. He's spiky, and that's what I liked in. As I said before, the players I brought in. Beagrie was incredible at Nile. The attacking side that day was unbelievable. But I had good choices, didn't I? But fortunately, Nile did his cruciate, which I said before, so that I had to sell Mike Sherrin because of the kit packs going and that big stand going, so which I didn't want to do because he was the England under 21 international. So I was having to have a little bit of a change around as well at that time. But some of the football was fantastic. I used to love watching it myself, and it's great when you get credit and people coming up to you and saying about those games. Of course they'll say, which I've said earlier about some of my defeats, and the defeat against QPR on last Saturday. I went mad at Alan Kernahan because he cost us the goal. And they're probably thinking, why are you going so mad? Because we've lost 1-0, it's the end of the season, we're okay. And then when it came out that I'd gone, I knew I was going, that they realised why I'd gone mad at the end of the game.
Yeah. You must have been frustrated as well at that time that you couldn't get Tony Coton on the pitch, because he was one of the best goalkeepers in the country. He had a persistent shoulder injury, and you couldn't play him anywhere near as much as you would have liked. And obviously that was the days when City didn't necessarily have a budget that allowed for top quality 2 or 3 players in every position like they do now. And the drop off from Coton to Dibble was a big one. I mean, if you'd have been able to get him on the pitch a bit more and maybe brought in an additional defender, we were on the cusp of having a very decent side, weren't we?
Yeah, I had Martin Marginson as well, who was the third choice goalkeeper. Martin was only just coming, through the ranks. He was far too young to be classed as a number one, and Dibbs was great again in the dressing room. But you're talking about Tony Coton, you're talking about one of the best keepers in England, and again, one of the best people. In the dressing room, he was fantastic. He had a great sense of humour, talk and shout and have a go at people if they weren't doing the jobs right, and that's what I wanted in people. And so he was without a shadow of a doubt a massive miss for us.
Yeah. When you took the job, there was the famous headline of Brian Who, which I don't want to dwell on, such a stupid headline, but you mentioned in the book that there was a bit of there was a lack of appreciation for what you'd done in the game, and that frustrated you. I mean, why was there such ignorance, do you feel, towards your appointment?
I think out of all the reports that used to come, it was one particular guy that wouldn't let go all the time I was there. And he came up with the Brian Who thing, and I went, well, I'd done promotion in my first year when I was 34, so I was player manager the first year, and 4 years in the Championship, 5 years in the Championship at Oxford United. Hang on a minute, I've just done 10 years apprenticeship, and I think I deserve a chance. And I think that's part of the problem now, that a lot of good English young managers don't always get the opportunity to do what I did. And so even some of the more experienced managers never had the opportunity to go and manage at a top club. So that was how people were looking at it, Brian Who. And I went, so you don't remember me, the fact that I played for Luton Town when I was captain when we put Man City down? Not that I'm bragging about it, because it's one of those things, but that was a great result in my football career. So that's what I said. But it was one guy in particular that wouldn't let go. No matter what I did, he wouldn't let go.
Yeah.
Which I found hard to take, to be fair, because, give people a chance.
Yeah.
You can't just shoot somebody where well, hang on a minute. So I've been at Oxford United, a championship side, and they've been in the Premier, and you don't know who Brian Horton is. I had no time for him.
Yeah. What do you think happened the second half of that second season? Because we were doing very well. We were up in top 6, top 8 for much of it, because some of our home performances and results were fantastic. But then after December, I think we only won 4 games. Now, 2 of them were Blackburn, who were about to win the league, which we'll come to because that was a great night, and Liverpool. But to win 4, that was where the problem was, wasn't it? What do you think you needed? What would you have needed to have avoided that?
This is what I was asking the board for, and particularly the chairman. Could I, before obviously the deadline, could I bolster the team? I need some players. You know, Quinny's been out, Tony's been out, Uwe'd been out, and I hadn't got a big enough side. I was putting young kids in to do men's job in the Premier League that weren't really up to it at that time. So that's where when I eventually knew that I wasn't going to be here next season, because they wouldn't give me the money to bolster the team, and that was the biggest problem.
Tell me about the Luis Figo deal, because this is probably one that not everybody knows, that we were, or you were alerted to this young player. He was a young player at the time. You went to watch him and you liked the look of him and tried to get a deal done. What was give us the backstory to that?
Well, Malcolm Allison used to come down to watch games, and Francis used to look after him great. And I'd always go up, whether win or lose, I'd always go up to the boardroom after, and Malcolm was in there. And I steeped in football, and I used to love being in his company. And he actually said to me, Brian, have you seen Luis Figo? Because of his Portuguese connections, he'd heard of this boy. And I said, no, because it's not like it is now on TV that you can watch all the foreign games. You can watch, and get feedback from wherever he's playing at that time. Sporting Lisbon, wasn't he? Sporting Lisbon. And I said, no, I haven't. I said, but I'll check it out. So I got my secretary, Julia, to make some phone calls, find out when he'll be playing next or where they're playing or whatever. And she came back and said, Portugal are playing in Northern Ireland. And then I spoke to somebody else that, he'll be playing. And so Tony Book and I, off we went, flew over to Ireland, watched him play. Wow, what a player. So I came back and I said to Francis, whatever it takes, try and get him if we can. And we got his agents, some English agents involved, met him at the Stanleylands again. The agents, not him, just agents talking about what it was going to be. And it was just too rich. It was just too much. But what a great coup that would have been if we could have pulled that one off.
Yeah.
He went on to have an unbelievable career, didn't he?
Absolutely.
So that's what we're doing. I was trying to, bring some top players into the football club at that time, And
then I just want to talk about that Blackburn game individually, because it was, I think it was a Monday Night Football. It was on Sky. They were champions-elect. It was muddy pitch. We were 2-1 down and won the game 3-2. And it was just a fantastic occasion. I mean, tell us about your team selection that night, because I know Peter Beagrie wasn't involved and Paul Walsh played to the left, and you were sort of not in the dugout. You were looking at it from afar. What was your feeling that night?
We beat Liverpool on a Good Friday. They'd won the cup the week before, and they had asked us if they'd switch it from the Saturday to the Friday. And Bernard Alford, who was fantastic with me at the football club, spoke to Bernard about it, or he spoke to me about it, and then we said to Francis about taking them on the Friday, which we did. And Maurizio Gaudino scored with a diving header late on, beat them 1-0.
What a player he was, by the way.
What a good player he was. And then, so I'd give him the Saturday off. We got a phone call on the Sunday morning. We're going to train on Main Road before we play on the Monday, to say Maurizio had got a virus and couldn't play or take part on the Monday. So I wasn't going to play him. It's easy for me to say that now, but I wasn't going to play him. Fitzroy Simpson came in into midfield instead of Maurizio, and left Biggs out, which was hard doing. He'd always have his say. And I played Walshy, so I went Nicky Summerby, Gwynny, Uwe, Walsh on the left. Walshy went, I've never played there. I've always been a striker. And I just said to him, don't play there. Just go where you want to go. If you want to go in between the strikers, if you want to end up past them. And they couldn't handle him. They couldn't handle that front four that night. And it was just a great game of football. I virtually knew I was going at this time. And so I decided not to sit with David Moss and Tony Book, and I sat behind, not in the stand actually, but just behind, about 12 rows back. And I just enjoyed the football without shouting and bawling, and I fancied us that night, to be honest, because we were good against some so-called better teams at that time. And obviously we came out winning, and I took them back to the hotel where we'd stayed in the afternoon for a drink after, and they couldn't understand why, until I told them the reason why, that I wasn't staying, and I wanted to buy them all a drink for producing such a good performance.
It was a fantastic evening. Tell us about Gaudino then, because he was interesting, wasn't he? He was such a classy player. How did that deal come about?
Again, through an agent, and he'd been in the German World Cup squad, and just got a phone call about him, checked him out, and just took him. Very, very talented footballer, swarthy, long black hair, and very talented footballer. But sometimes he wouldn't do the defensive side that I wanted him to do, i.e. which Flitty did and Steve Lomas did. He was a luxury player, but if you play him at home, which he scored that day, fantastic away from home. So I probably wouldn't have played him. It's easy for me to say that now, but I probably wouldn't have played him anyway at Blackburn.
So you said you knew you were going because you weren't backed in the transfer market at certain points, and that was the feeling. How did you find out, and what's your version of events of how it unfolded? Because we've heard from Francis his version, which we'll come to in a minute. But how did you see it? What was your?
I'd gone down to a League Managers Association dinner on the Sunday night after we played the last game, and David Moss, who was my assistant, we'd been to the dinner, stayed over, and next morning I'm going there for breakfast, and I'm sure it was Frank Clark. I can't be 100%, but I'm sure it was Frank. And he said to me, "Brian, how are you?" I said, "I'm all right." "Why? What's the problem?" He said, "Have you not seen the national papers?" I said, "No, I haven't." "Why?" He said, "Well," showed me, Brian Horton sacked at Man City. So that was the first I heard about it. So I tried to get hold of Francis, couldn't get hold of him. Eventually got Julia, my secretary, to get hold of him, and I went to his house, and just didn't like the way it was done. Basically, if he'd have told me face to face before he comes out, that's fine, you know. But I had two young kids that found it hard. They, you know, because the press at that time were then round my house on the Monday morning, Monday evening, you know, and it's not nice for them or for me to hear it that way.
I was going to say, and also for you, because you're somebody who you've put a lot into the game. You don't expect to find the news out in the newspapers before you've been told yourself. It sort of goes against the moral code of the game, doesn't it?
I feel so. And do you know, I always have had this in my managerial career, because I got a free transfer when I was 17, and it broke my heart. I thought, well, that's the end of my career. And I've always wanted to be in. If we're telling kids or we're telling somebody that I'm going to let them go, I always do it face to face. And it's very, very hard. Harder with the younger players and senior players. So I'm of that era that wanted it. If I'm going, just tell me face to face. That's no problem. Just sort it out. Let's be right. You know, I've got a contract. Do it properly. And that's what I'd always done. And it wasn't done like that. And it was just sad, really, to hear it that way.
Yeah. I mean, Francis's version of events is that you went to a league managers meeting. He held an evening with the Blues, which was a separate event, and that somebody on the board, one of the directors, their son leaked it to Malcolm Allison, who then sold this story to the Sun. And then because of the furore that was caused by that story being sold, it then left him in a position where he had to get rid of you. But your version obviously conflicts with that, and you feel like you were getting the signs leading up to the end of the season anyway. You know, you were saying at the Blackburn game you thought it was over, didn't you?
I've been in management a long time, in football a long time, that I can read into situations, you know, without going too far into it.
Yeah.
But I'd got the vibes. And when you get the vibes, because they won't let you progress, and, you know, I wanted a new left back, I wanted another centre half, I wanted maybe another midfield player to compete with those two, you know, which would have taken some beating, to be fair. But if you're not getting those answers, then, you know, somewhere along the line, you know, you're not going to be there for too long.
And I'm sure you took, given the person that you are, you took no pleasure in City's decline thereafter, because things after you left went one way, and that was downwards. I mean, Alan Ball came in and essentially, whether it was his decision or the chairman at the time or whatever, all the best elements of the team were sold rather than what you were trying to do, which was add to the best elements. I mean, why? How confused were you by some of the decisions, transfer decisions that were made after you'd gone?
Well, I was because the players. I'd given Gary Flickcroft a 5-year deal with Peter Swales, you say so. Steve Lomas long-term contract. Was trying to tie other people down. Keith Curl, a 5-year deal he got, who was again good in the dressing room, and so you're trying to build your own team, and then. If you're not being able to do that, and those players that were being sold, and they're bringing lesser players in, for me, that's where it all started. Walsh was sold to Portsmouth in a deal with Jerry Craney. I think it was money plus Walsh for Jerry Craney.
Yeah.
Flitty went to Blackburn. Tony Colton goes to Man United. All of a sudden, Nouvet was out of favour. It was almost like, why are you breaking a team up? Do you know what I mean? So, no, not at all did it give me pleasure. It was a team that I'd, put together and not far away from being a really, really good side. And all of a sudden I see it crumbling from, I've gone to Huddersfield then, which is a good move for me, and because I could stay in Manchester and commute to there. But I'd worked hard to get to Man City, to be in that top echelon of managers, and I just felt I needed a bit more time, to prove even more that I could do it at that level.
What about the City that we see today? I mean, I know you're a visitor. How do the club look after you and treat you and stuff like that these days?
I still do things for them. I go around to the supporters branches and do a talk and never charge, and just look after a couple of my mates come who are massive Man City fans, so just look after a couple of beers and so they know that I do things like that. So when I ring up for tickets, they look after us fantastic, So and I'm missing it at the moment because I love watching them play, and what Pep's done is incredible, and I want to go and see them train, which I'd asked him about when I met him at Vincent Kompany's testimonial dinner. And he just come over to say happy birthday to me, which was fantastic for him thing to do. And I just said to him, I'm loving watching you play. I come a lot, want to see you train. Anytime you want, make arrangements. I'm trying to do. Obviously can't do it at the moment because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So they look after us fantastic. It's a fantastic football club, and not just me they look after. They still look after a lot of other people, and credit to the owners, and the way they do things is just top notch.
Yeah. And what about you sort of touched on it there, but the football that we play under Pep, I mean, you, as somebody who, during your time at City, played very attacking football and it was about entertaining, you must be loving seeing what he's done to the team.
Just incredible. And I've heard people say about how he is in training, how demanding he is, and you can see that, the way they play. I mean, I being a midfield player, nowhere near De Bruyne, and I was delighted last night he won the Players' Player of the Season. Just to watch him, the quality of his passing, his energy, everything. Aguero, wingers when they're playing, and Sterling, and when they're playing some football, they do, and they play out from the back of us because that's the way Pep wants them to be. Just incredible football, and just love watching them.
And just one final question. You mentioned Bernard Halford before, who we very sadly lost recently. I mean, I've not yet met anybody in football who's not got amazing things to say about Bernard. I mean, what was your experience of working with him and him as a person?
From day one, Bernard was on my side. Bernard, and I believe with other managers exactly the same. He treated everybody the same. He never got involved politically about team selections. He worked tremendously well with Peter Swales, and from day one we hit it off, and he was fantastic. I still see his wife Karen and his family at the games because they get looked after great as well. And he was just City through and through, wasn't he? I've got a couple of scarves in there. I've got the red and black one he got, and the blue and white one, and his cap.
Yeah.
He was just a true gentleman that never interfered with any decision or questioned any decision you wanted about football, because that's what he thought. That's your job, that's my job, and he just did it to perfection, basically.
Brian Horton, 2,000 games, a life in football. Your book is out at the moment, which I would implore all City fans to read. It's a great thing to dive into. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today.
Thanks very much. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Man City podcast, and thank you, of course, to Brian Horton for giving us his time and being so honest. If you liked what you heard today, make sure you subscribe to the Man City podcast. There are plenty of other episodes available for you to listen to right now, including interviews with Joe Royle and Andy Morrison, Paul Lake and his wife Jo, Dennis Stewart, Francis Lee and Brian Marwood. They're all available now wherever it is you do your podcast listening. You can find more content like this on mancity.com or download the official Man City app. Thanks for taking the time to listen, and hopefully you'll join me again soon.